All right. So look, I guess the first thing I like to do is just give a bit of a seasonal update, just to sort of show what's happening with rainfall locally and a bit further afield. And I guess this is an incredibly encouraging map, which basically shows the rainfall over the last 3 months through New South Wales. And I guess one of the nice things, and it's less pertinent to people here in this group, is that one of the missing parts of the room of the state that hadn't really been filled in was this far southeast region around Bega, who've now actually had an excellent break as well. So things are progressing really well down there too. I guess what we can see is that in our own areas up in the Hunter and the coast, we've had some nice rain over the last 3 months. It's probably slowed down a little bit in the last 3 to 4 weeks, but that's probably not been a bad thing for some people because it's given some opportunities to make some early silage and also for a few of the paddocks to dry out and get a bit more oxygen in the soil, particularly as we get closer to the coast. I guess the other thing, which is again increasingly encouraging, is this sort of band of green through here, which is our cropping belt and cropping zone. And we can see there we've actually had some fantastic rain right through that cropping zone. And that's actually extending out into some of these more western areas out around Moree and Walgett, which are also looking again at having very, very strong seasons. So when Rob talks about $180 a tonne barley being offered to him already, I think we've got to keep in mind that that's an early offer. So we may not be at the bottom of that price point, but I'll put up a few prices which we've seen later in the meeting. But again, you know, incredibly encouraging situation out west with what we've got. We obviously need a little bit more rain to get a really, really good finish. But I guess when we look at the next charts, which is the seasonal outlooks, which I ran on the 27th of August, I guess it looks like we may be in line for a little bit of follow-up. So I guess the two charts that we have here on the left is we've got the September to November 3-month rain outlook, and you can see both in our own regions as well as in that cropping zone, the chance of exceeding median rainfall, according to the Bureau, is actually really high. It's at that top end. Similarly, that extends if you go into the October to December chart on the right-hand side, which really says I think quite reasonably, well, very good conditions in our own region, but also in those key cropping areas. I guess it does bring possible risks with it. And one of the risks we have seen in years like this, and I guess the closest analogy I could bring to what we're seeing now in the Western Zone is a year like 2016, where we had tremendous amounts of crop in land, but we did have significant issues with rain during harvest. And that had a couple of impacts. Firstly, it led to a reasonable amount of spoilt grain. Now, we won't get into details today about the issues around feeding with spoilt grain. Firstly, you know, if we do get some water damaged grain, it means that those prices for grains may be even cheaper again. But secondly, that we may need to just start thinking, if we do see spoilt grains, about some things like mycotoxin risk. The other thing, though, that can happen in years like this, and it's certainly something we've been talking to a lot of our clients about, is if your business is heavily leveraged onto buying hay to actually feed cows, as opposed to just hay for springers. So there's a bit of a difference. If you're just buying, you know, a couple 100 kilos a year for springers, we can manage moderate feed quality in that space. But if you're actually in a business that's looking at buying hay for a substantial part of your feed budget for actually your milking cows, we've got to be really cautious in years like this, because two things happen. Firstly, we get extremely good crop growth in the West, which means instead of cutting drought-stressed crops that are knee-high, we're cutting very, very strong crops that are often well over waist high with respect to the cereal hays. So that inherently brings a much higher percentage of fibre in those feeds and reduces their feed quality. The second two things that occur on top of that is when they get cut, because there's such huge bulk and those crops actually take quite a few days to dry down. So we can actually burn quite a few sugars getting them dried down. And then the third thing that happens is because if it does come in wet, the hay harvest can be quite delayed. So we were looking at a situation in 2016 where there was a lot of very strong clover crops made, and a lot of those strong clover hays were still coming back at only 8.5, 9 megajoules of energy. So I guess the big warning on that is to buy smart. If you are buying, start talking to people now. And there may be some opportunities out there, and we've certainly got some clients looking at this as well, to actually clean up some of the hay that's been stockpiled in sheds from the previous season at reasonable prices. Because there's a couple of opportunities there. Firstly, some of you may still be recipients potentially of freight subsidy. Okay, and if that freight subsidy is still there, that's likely to run out come November, December. So you may be able to look at that combined pricing of freight subsidy benefit plus some of the stuff that might be in storage from last year, if it's really, really high quality, and snaffling some of that a little bit ahead of the curve is possibly worth thinking about, as well as seeing what happens. Because if hay is important for your feed budget, obviously a megajoule difference makes a huge impact. And we talked a bit about that last time. I won't go into it too much now. So getting the most out of spring, I guess there's a few things that we want to think about this spring. And here's a nice paddock of some lovely grass up at Hannam Vale that we were on a few weeks ago. Okay, so what we need to understand is what's happening in our own paddocks with respect to soil moisture. We've got two different groups here. We've got the hunter guys and the guys on the Barrington and Gloucester rivers who are probably looking at actually starting irrigating now. And we've also got the guys on the coast that are probably predominantly dry land. So I guess it's really important at this stage that we're actually on top of where our soil moisture is, because we're moving into a phase where peak growth is likely, and particularly for the irrigators, making sure that we're actually in a position to take advantage of that irrigation and not let the soils dry out before we wait too long. Very, very important at this stage. I guess the other thing is that we have seen some updates on what's happening in the rivers, and particularly with Glenbourne. I think we're pushing up nearly to 50% allocation there now. Kyle, do you have an update on that allocation at this stage?
Yeah, so it basically is up to 52% plus or 53% plus carryover. So most of us, worked hard to try and get our maximum carryover of 25. So we're kind of sitting at around that 78, which is definitely better than what we probably were all thinking we were going to get. So I think most of us can make a go with that anyway. So, and if the continued outlook of where the rain falls continues, I'd say that those allocations will increase. We've been on free flow events as well out of the Goulburn, so there's some positivity. We've been pumping recently without actually taking out of our allocation. So
people would be on allocation now if they were pumping, but you've got free flow in the Goulburn, no free flow coming down the Pages or the Hunter at the moment?
Well, that obviously if there's free flow in the Goulburn that goes into the Hunter, so we've been on free flow up until last week. I haven't checked this week because I haven't ordered any water for myself, but all last week we were on free flow in the lower section here.
Yep.
So, I guess, as advice is keep an eye on those free flow events, log into the iWAS system and, utilise that free water while it's there rather than chewing off your allocation that, you want to keep that water for summer.
And you're certainly starting to see some soil start to dry out under the high growth rates at the moment, Kyle?
Yeah, and that's right. And you're looking at these warmer temperatures we're getting. You can justify, especially if you've got, these free flow events, is using that water on things like lucerne and things like that, charging the profile back up, making sure it's full, and that critical water point, making sure that's right to go. So utilise that water and keep irrigators going, I guess.
Excellent. And I guess this is the time of year where we see some of our peak water use efficiency on ryegrass and cereals as well. So, there's a great opportunity there. And the rates that we're seeing, we're certainly seeing growth rates sort of 60, 70 kilos dry matter per hectare per day. And that has a pretty solid impact on drying profiles out when grass is growing that quickly. So chasing the pastures at the moment is pretty good value for people too with respect to water use efficiency. Excellent. So we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. We're going to talk a little bit about grazing management and what's happening with rotations. Again, our grass growth rates are rapidly starting to increase now, and I guess we're very focused for most of our clients now on shifting from a mindset where we've been managing quantity of growth to managing quality of growth as we bust into spring. We'll pull Josh up shortly to talk a little bit about that shortly. And I guess people's planning with silage and hay, and we've had a few people ask some questions about where to and what was that.